Hello, cohort. For this week's discussion forum, I read Spiritual Formation and Emerging Adulthood, a Practical Theology for College and Young Adult Ministry, written by David Setran and Chris Kiesling. And I hope you enjoy my review. First, I would like to provide a summary of the book. The authors cover various topics relevant to spiritual formation among emerging adults. And so on this slide, you will see that I have included the chapter topics, which include faith and spiritual formation, identity, church, vocation, morality, sexuality and relationships, and mentoring. And actually, in preparing for this presentation, I realized that one of the professors here at Huntington, who teaches in our ministry department, he provided one of the reviews on the back of the book. His name is Tom Bergler. He teaches youth ministry here at Huntington. And one of his quotes from the back of the book is that the authors sympathetically explain why so many emerging adults struggle to grow into spiritually mature followers of Jesus. So I thought that quote provided a pretty good summary of one goal of the book. And although I don't have time to summarize each chapter, the authors begin the book by describing the religious slump of today's emerging adults. They then elaborate by addressing the various areas that impact spiritual formation among emerging adults. They then provide recommendations within each chapter for those working with the emerging adult population, ways in which these individuals can help this population. And they conclude with a chapter concerning the value of mentorship. And then larger than that, they do provide a final chapter of conclusion as well. So there is a lot of research and wisdom wrapped up in the 250 pages of this book. I believe that this book is extremely applicable to those serving in higher education. First of all, the book is written to describe the college-aged population. Based on the book's introduction, emerging adults are ages 18 through 30. So that's certainly the population that we are generally experiencing in a higher education setting. Additionally, it is important for higher education professionals to understand the developmental process of college students. This book not only provides a greater understanding of the developmental process, but the authors identify generational factors that impact the spiritual formation of emerging adults. For example, when discussing vocation, the authors address that the current generation of emerging adults, the generation that we are serving now, desires to delay adulthood, which impacts their ability to develop a vocational vision. And lastly, as for how this book is applicable to higher education, the book can be easily applied to the world of higher education thanks to the recommendations found in each chapter. The authors address how those serving this population can help. As for credibility, research shows that spiritual formation is an important topic to understand when working with young adults. In an article I found by an author named Kraft, she reviews the research findings of Aston, which showed that spiritual growth impacts various areas of a college student's life. With increased spiritual growth comes greater academic performance, a stronger emotional well-being, and greater satisfaction with the overall college experience. Thus, Setran and Kiesling provide a wealth of knowledge on a topic that is highly relevant and important. Credibility is also found through the research performed by the authors. With over 30 pages of notes in the back of the book and an index that is 6 pages long, it's evident that the authors spent a tremendous amount of time in preparation for this book. They do make reference to various student development theorists, including Erik Erikson and James Marcia, who we have studied. They also quote famous theologians such as Walter Brueggemann and N.T. Wright. As you can see in this slide, both of the authors, Setran and Kiesling, have a PhD and are currently employed as faculty at institutions of higher education. So they certainly know a lot about the world of higher ed, have served this population of students, and are thus credible in their ability to write this book. After reading this book, I would not recommend it to current college students. The audience that the authors were pinpointing is clearly those working with emerging adults. Although I do fit within this category as a current resident director, even I felt, quote, too young at times to be reading this book. Recognizing that much of what was being communicated applies to myself and my generation, as I fit within the emerging adult age range, makes for an interesting experience. I would recommend this book to those serving in ministry, particularly those who may be facilitating college or young adult groups within a church. This book is also a great resource for those currently serving in higher education, those that who desire to better understand and better reach the undergraduate population. And lastly, I do think that this is a helpful book for those pursuing a master's degree or a PhD in higher ed. Being a book about spiritual formation, this book is very grounded in Scripture. The authors were highly intentional in every chapter to address what Scripture had to say about the various topics. For example, in the sexuality chapter, the authors discuss what 1 Corinthians has to say about the topic of sexuality, and they go quite in depth into that passage or that chapter of Scripture. As a whole, this book addresses a very relevant topic to all Christians. First of all, whether or not we fall into the category of emerging adults, Christ desires that we pursue spiritual growth. 2 Peter 3:18 urges us to grow in the grace and knowledge of Jesus. In addition to pursuing our own growth, we are also called to make disciples, as stated in Matthew 28:19. Thus, this book addresses a topic that is both highly valuable and biblically relevant. I hope that many of you may feel inspired to read this book as a result of my review. Here are the references that I used in preparation for this presentation. I think that the authors have many valuable things to contribute to those of us who desire to serve the emerging adult population, which I believe we all do, in our pursuit of a degree in higher education. So I hope that you will consider giving this a read, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen.